For many couples, getting featured in the New York Times wedding and engagement section is a big feat. Each week, hundreds of people submit their love stories to the paper and eagerly await a response back, hoping maybe that they've made the cut. And this exciting tradition goes back hundreds of years. The first New York Times wedding announcement was published on September 18, 1851. It was one sentence long and featured a young, newly married bride and groom from New York. But today, these bios are typically longer and feature all different types of people. You don't have to be a financier, an executive, or come from a prestigious family to make it into the pages. All you need is a good story that captures the hearts of readers. So, how do outlets select who gets published in this coveted section? It's a long series of steps, but it starts with the editor first sorting through submissions.
At the beginning of the week, give us a stack of the submissions that he thought would fit the wedding status. And he looked for a diversity of couples, a diversity of backgrounds. But, sometimes you'd read the pages and it would be like the same finance people and lawyers over and over and over. And so you'd get these people on the phone, and 95% of the time they were extremely excited to talk to the New York Times. And the 5% that they weren't, they really were not excited about this.
That's Kate Doty, a writer and former editor at the New York Times, where she spent several years working as a wedding announcements writer in the weekly weddings and engagements section. Doty is also the author of the new book, Mergers and Acquisitions, or Everything I Know About Love I Learned on the Wedding Pages. When Doty got married 11 years ago, she and her husband were featured in the New York Times weddings section. In the post, it was included that the bride was a descendant of Edward Doty, a passenger on the Mayflower and a signer of the Mayflower Compact.
The reason I had it included is because, I would interview these brides and grooms, and by and large, it wasn't the brides and grooms that were so intent on including this information in the announcement. It was like their mothers or their fathers or their grandmothers. It was certainly more important to older generations, but I remember thinking, like super wealthy, elite society people can have their Mayflower lineage included, then by God, Kate Doty, the daughter of a teacher and a woodworker and park ranger, can have that in there as well.
Doty believes that today, these pages are the perfect opportunity to share the quirky details, personal successes, or an interesting love story that led the couple to find each other. Rewind back to the 1800s, and these pages were mainly reserved for prominent families like the nuptials of a Carnegie or a Vanderbilt.
There was such, and there still is, such a public appetite for news about rich people, especially in New York. You'd have like the Astors and the Vanderbilts and the Van Leeuwens and the people chronicled in all of Edith Wharton's books, spending just gobs and gobs of money on weddings, and they would have these, exorbitantly expensive weddings. And that society, like, Fifth Avenue Presbyterian Church, that sort of thing. And there would be so many reporters trying to cover this wedding that they would build these fabric tents that went straight from where the carriage would pull up on the street to the door of the church. So there's a lot of exclusion happening, but by the same token, these families still needed their mergers that they were making through weddings to be known by the public to affirm their place in society.
Today, wedding pages are more inclusive. It's a beloved tradition that's celebrated in small towns and big cities alike. Each outlet is different, with some papers going into great detail on what the couple wore and the ceremony itself. Doty points to her own mother's announcement that chronicled every element of the classic Southern wedding.
My mother's wedding announcement was huge. It listed what was in her bouquet and what her dress was made out of. And so it quickly evolved from like just rich people having their announcements in the paper to everybody having their announcements in the paper. And they became more democratic, I guess.
With more people submitting bios, Doty says that she's met a lot of remarkable people throughout the years. However, not all of these whirlwind stories turned out to be true. Like any other traditional media outlet, the New York Times would interview couples under consideration and then dig deeper to make sure all of the information they provided checked out.
You get on the phone with the HR departments of their companies and make sure they are professionally who they say they are. And you'd call the priest or the rabbi in the church or the temple or in the synagogue to make sure that the pieces of information these people had submitted were actually true. And often you would catch them out in a lie, and that would prompt another conversation. a more challenging one this time.
Doty says more people than you'd think would lie or exaggerate the truth when it came to these submissions.
We would catch people out on some fairly significant falsehoods. Not just like, oh, I'm not actually descended from Edward Doty, not anything like that, but they would lie about their positions. They would lie about their titles. They would lie about whether they'd been married before or not, because if you've read the announcements, you'll know that they do note whether the bride's first marriage ended in divorce or the groom was a widow, that sort of thing. People would lie about it because they didn't want to be embarrassed by being divorced. So the rules feel a bit antiquated, and I think to a certain extent are, but the whole point of it was to create a complete portrait of that couple. And a previous marriage, the wedding news editor believed, was part of that portrait.
So if you're hoping to get your engagement or wedding into your local newspaper or a larger national outlet like the New York Times, Doty has some straightforward advice.
Tell the truth, number one. Be as truthful as you can be, and lay out your story as best you can for the editors that are about to read your announcement. You're far more likely to catch the eye of an editor when you really talk about why you're marrying this person and what it is that makes your relationship and what will make your marriage tick. Those are both really important things. But the most important thing is just to tell the truth.
If you're looking for some inspiration, read some previously published announcements. Some can be more traditional and will touch on the background of the couple and the families on either side. But some can dig deeper into the duo's path to love, barriers they faced, or why they chose to ultimately commit.
I hope that we always have wedding announcements, and this is why. Number one, it's part of a person's story, and I think that it's important to have those markers in a person's life. I think that as marriage evolves, the very nature of marriage evolves, which I think we've seen that do, and what we consider a family, what American society is willing to accept as a family, evolves. I hope that we see a more democratized wedding section, and I think we're already doing that. For sure. It's not just like white, straight, cishet couples anymore. I think the pages are reflecting for more and more Americans as they are and as they live and as they choose to live. And I think that's an absolutely wonderful thing. And so I hope that we have many years to come of wedding announcements that reflect these people, that reflect the people that had been for so long excluded from the pages or didn't feel like they belonged. So I hope I get to read my kid's wedding announcement in whatever form that takes. Maybe it's not a marriage announcement. Maybe it's a partnership announcement. Maybe it's, I don't know. But I hope that we continue to recognize people in print or digitally as they make these giant decisions in their lives. I think that's really important.
To find out more about engagement and wedding announcements and the history of this tradition, as well as our guest, Kate Doty, visit viewpointsradio.org. Also, check out her book, Mergers and Acquisitions, available online and in bookstores now. To get more behind the scenes, search Viewpoints Radio on Twitter and Facebook. This segment was written and produced by Amira Zaveri, studio production by Jason Dickey. I'm Marty Peterson.
Viewpoints returns in just a moment.
Pandemic school closures have taken a large toll on both children and their parents, socially, emotionally, and academically. But with prevention steps, including regular PCR-based COVID-19 testing, outbreaks in schools may be largely prevented. In fact, the Biden administration has identified testing in schools as a critical proactive step in recovery from the pandemic. Here's Shiraz Latiwala, Senior Vice President of Business Transformation Projects, Thermo Fisher Scientific.
Testing for schools can be done accurately, efficiently, and affordably by using pooled PCR testing programs where multiple samples are tested at once. Batch results are reported as positive or negative and returned in 12 to 48 hours, helping to quickly indicate a potential outbreak.
Highly accurate COVID-19 testing helps school administrators detect outbreaks quickly, so informed decisions about in-person learning can be made. Find out more at thermofisher.com/COVID testing for schools.
COVID-19 vaccines are rolling out, and many Americans are looking forward to getting back to normal. However, chronic stress of the past year can impact memory, mood, and anxiety. So during June, Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month, the Alzheimer's Association reminds you to make brain health a priority. Beth Kallmeyer, Vice President of Care and Support for the Alzheimer's Association, has tips to restore mental well-being.
First, think about recommitting to brain-healthy basics, like regular exercise, a heart-healthy diet, and getting plenty of sleep. Try to unplug from technology every night. Do what you can to manage your own stress, especially if you're a caregiver for a person living with Alzheimer's or dementia. And return to normal at your own pace by taking small steps and setting boundaries.
Kallmeyer says it also helps the brain to help others by volunteering in your community. For example, by supporting the Alzheimer's Association's The Longest Day event, June 20th. Find out more about Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month at alz.org.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Viewpoints is a production of MediaTrax Communications. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more about upcoming shows. And find a library of past programs on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and more information about our guests at viewpointsradio.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Viewpoints. Coming up next week.
We don't need more and more processed foods, much of which is getting dumped in the global south.
The pervasiveness of palm oil. Then,
I typically run maybe 60 to 80 miles a week, sometimes more than that. And I also do a lot of cross-training.
The life of an ultra-marathon runner. I'm Marty Peterson.
and I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.